Video. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. You know, there are certain shurim that start the same way every single week. It's actually funny. Yes. I have some shurim that I listen to in Torah Anytime. The guy goes, "Welcome! Thank you for joining us for the learning of Torah's Hashem, Be'ezras Hashem Yisbarach." Every single week, without fail. Different people have ways of starting their shir. Mine just starts and it starts. Right. We have an historic evening tonight, which is going to be discussed slightly tonight as part of the Chumash shir. There were two things that I saw tonight, which I found very, very interesting. I saw them today, and I'd like to mention them. And they will both be a little bit political. Again, I'm not trying really to be political over here. That's not the point of tonight's shir. The point of tonight's shir really is to discuss the Torah aspect of it. But within Torah, Torah's often or almost always, pardon me, has something to say about current events and about everything. And so I will try to have a few things that I hope will be of interest. Let's start with the following. Rav Yaakov Galinsky writes a very interesting comment. And it's the first thing that we need to keep in mind as we start the Parasha. Vayhi Beshalach Paro es ha'am. Vayhi, and it was Beshalach Paro, when Paro sent out es ha'am, the nation. V'lonocham alekim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and take them derech eretz Plishtim, through the land of Plishtim. Because the HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Pen yinochen ha'am, the people will have some form of regret. Bir'osa milchama v'sham etzam, when they see a kind of war, and they will go back to Egypt. And so instead he took them via the Yam Suf. One of the reasons he took them via the Yam Suf. The other reason is, of course, to lure out the Egyptians, make them go in and drown them. But that's a separate discussion. So the question that Rav Yaakov Galinsky asked, and it's something that I spoke about today when I was teaching, and I gave a different answer to this, but Rav Yaakov Galinsky asked the following question. Let's go back to the first few words of the Torah. If you had been writing this, what would you have said? Vayehi, and it was what? It was when what happened? When God took the Jewish people out of Egypt, when God beat up Pharaoh, when Pharaoh said uncle and gave up. There are lots of things that you could have said. None of them seem to be what we're mentioning here, and rather what do we say? Vayehi, and it was Beshalach Paro es ha'am, when Pharaoh sent the people out, which makes it look like, exactly, what does it make it look like?
Well, he's called the shots.
Like he called the shots. Yeah? Which is very strange, because is it true to say that Pharaoh called the shots here? Absolutely not. It would be wrong for anybody to say that Pharaoh called the shots. Okay? I did speak about this today, and I spoke about it in my class, and I said to them that the reason it says this is because it was a way of Pharaoh luring himself into sense of security. Meaning, if this had not happened, let's say, why did God have to wait for Pharaoh to say, okay, they can go? Why didn't God just say, okay, Jews, what we're going to do now is the following. We're going to turn the entire Egypt dark for the next 3 months. You have 3 months to pack your bags, to get moving. When I then release the Egyptians, they will be surprised to find there are no more Jews left in this country.
And you got 3 months start on them. Yeah.
And you got a 3-month head start on them, right? Isn't that something that's entirely plausible, considering them with miracles, right? Couldn't God go in and make the plague of boils so terrible that all the Egyptians were lying in bed and everybody walked out? This is a subject that almost could not be exhausted by coming up with all sorts of ideas of what God could have done and couldn't have done. And God doesn't need me to give him any suggestions. Trust me, he got enough. He would come up with more suggestions than I could come up in a million light years. So why did this happen? So it was to lure Pharaoh into sense of saying, wait a minute. When did the Jews leave this country? Only when I said so. Which gave him a false sense of confidence that what? He was in charge. He's the one that was sending out the Jewish people. Okay?
But had he forgotten why he said go?
That does happen.
Yeah.
It does seem to happen to
Young
people,
God was
strangely
defeated,
enough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was defeated,
He was defeated, and he was not just defeated. I mean, you think 230 votes is a defeat. You can't imagine. You can't imagine what a defeat looked like in Egypt.
Yes.
Pharaoh wished there was 230 votes. He wished there was no confidence. That would have been easy. This is intense. This is serious, right? So Pharaoh says, "I've sent them out," and he says, "Therefore, if I've sent them out, what can I do? I can bring them back, should I want to." And that's his plan. His plan is to bring them back. That was the first bit. However, Rav Yaakov Galinsky says a very important thing. He says, how come we read it like that? And he says, do you know who writes like that? It doesn't really answer the question, but I think there's a very big lesson within what he's saying. He says, if you open up the media, this is exactly what you would find. If you had turned on the EBC, right, the Egyptian Broadcasting Company, the next morning after they had left, yeah?
Rolling 24-hour news, yeah.
24-hour news. They didn't have Twitter at the time. They didn't have rolling 24-hour news. It was too expensive in the times of Egypt.
Oh, yeah.
So you'd have only the 7 o'clock news in the morning. But everybody,
That was it,
no, well, not everybody woke up. So all the firstborns didn't wake up to hear the news that next morning. But everybody else woke up the next day to hear the news. And if they had turned on to EBC, what would they had seen? Devastation. And the report would have said what? Pharaoh has finally let the Jewish people go. The report would not have said, God made that many miracles that people will go. We don't read that. That's not how the report reads. Why? Because this is how we see things. And the problem is we see the world and we see current events and we see everything through the eye of the media. And the eye of the media is very much, let's see what's happening on the ground. Let's forget about God in this entire story. Just look at what's happening on the ground. There are crazy things that happen. So, where was it that I saw it? Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky writes this. He says he remembers he was in Mir Yeshiva and there was a bus, an old decrepit bus that used to pick people up. And it used to take them to the big city. And it used to go around all the different little towns, used to pick people up and then make its way to the big city. And all these people from the little towns were little farmers or butchers or whatever they were. And they brought their wares to the big city. And then they would try to peddle them and to sell them. And they would come back. That was basically what used to happen. So he said the bus went around and there was a bit of a rickety bridge that was going across the river. And the bus went around, picked up 44 people, and you had the bus driver driving the bus. And sadly, the bridge cracked and all the people fell into the water and 45 people sadly drowned. It was a terrible tragedy. 45 people drowned. And he said at the time, the Mashgiach of Mir Yeshiva, the Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky, the Mashgiach said, people think that they started throwing blame at everybody. Was it the bus driver's fault, the way he drove, or was the bus too full, or was it the people that built the bridge? What was it? What was it that created this? And Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky said it has nothing to do with that. Actually, what you have to realize is it's God's way of doing certain things. For example, and he said, you read on Yom Kippur and on Rosh Hashanah. Let us say over the holiness of this day, and on this day everybody's going to take out, what do we say? Kama Yavram, Kama Yibareyun. How many will pass on and how many will be created? Mi Yichyeh, Umi Yamus. Who's going to live, who's going to die? Mi B'kitzur, who in water. Umi Ba'esh, and who in fire. Mi B'cherev, Umi B'chaya. Who's going to be...
Hanika.
Pardon?
Hanika.
Chanika, Skila, we have a whole bunch of them. But Cherev is sword, Chaya is an animal, wild animal. And I'll tell you, this is a crazy story that happened to us. I just went to a conference, and maybe I'll post the picture later. But I went to a conference, and I met a friend of mine. I was putting my stuff in my car, and he was on his way to his car. And he said, so you came to see my car? I'm like, I have no idea what happened to your car. Why would I come to see your car? You know, we're all Rabbanim. This wasn't like a conference where anybody was going to be showing up in a convertible. Hey, Aryeh. right? Nobody was going to be showing up in a convertible Ferrari or something, right? This was a rabbi's conference. He says, come and see my car. I says, okay. So he's driving, he shows me his car, and he's got this huge crack on his windscreen. Massive crack. I'm like, wow, I've never seen a crack like that before. He goes, yeah. I was driving down, I don't know if it was on the M6 or if it was on the M40, I'm not sure where we were. We went down to Heathrow, towards Heathrow, Hounslow, that area. It was called the Runnymede on Thames. That's where we were. Anyway, so he was driving down, and at 80 miles an hour, he hit a pheasant. A low-flying pheasant. I'm not sure what happened. This thing went across. He went... He probably literally... I asked him, did you kill the thing? He's like, what do you mean? I pulverized it, you know? Imagine a car hitting a pheasant at 80 miles an hour.
Yeah.
2 tons at 80 miles an hour. Put all that force together. That's enough to pulverize almost anything. And he had this huge crack. And my wife said to me, she said, you know, when we say Tfilas Haderech nowadays, and you ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu to save you from Chaya Ra, from a terrible animal. So we look back and we say, yeah, in the olden days, you used to travel and you could get attacked by a lion or by a tiger or by a bear. Things were really dangerous. But this also could be a Chaya Ra. Because the fellow said, you know, he still ended up driving down to the conference, even though he said he had to sit like this and look at his windscreen. And he said that he got lucky because there were probably no cars. I mean, can you imagine if something hits you at that speed, what are you going to do? You're going to swerve like crazy.
You saw it coming, yeah.
If you didn't see it coming, go boom. Like, you know, you get to something this huge boom on your windscreen and the whole thing goes.
Yeah.
It's huge. It's a huge thing to happen. So you just don't know. We say, sometimes you read these crazy stories and you say to yourself, have you ever read these stories in the news? And you read these stories and you say, wow, what a freak story. What a crazy story. Somebody went, what was that story? This couple, they went to Spain and they both died there or something? What was that story? This lady, this young woman, they died from some kind of poisoning in Spain 10 days after her husband died or some kind of story like that.
Yeah.
Pardon?
Something peculiar in the bedroom or something.
I don't know what it was. I can't remember what the story was. There was that. Sometimes you read people, they go to amusement park. This ride has been running properly for the last 20 years. Never anybody injured. Boom, the one time this person's on it, it goes. People, I mean, even think of the Leicester bus. How many times did the Leicester City bus go up and down in that helicopter? Every week. No issue, no problem. How many helicopters fly around this country day in, day out?
I'm sure it's probably
Hundreds.
It's probably service and everything.
And it's the top of the range. You know, this guy's going to service this helicopter. He's not poor. If you own it, he's a billionaire, not a millionaire. He'll service the stupid helicopter.
Yeah.
It still goes down. Why? And he said, the Mashgiach at the time of the Mir said, you know what? For whatever reason, there was a decree against all these people that they should die. When? Rosh Hashanah, that decree was made. How should they die? Drowning. So how are we going to drown? How's that going to happen? That 45 people are going to drown. So God sent a bus and he literally picked up all the guys. It's your turn, your turn, your turn, your turn, your turn. Okay, how are we going to do it? No problem. Everybody get on the bus. And down it went. As terrible as it sounds. But God has his way of setting these things up. God has his way that these things happen. And we have to realize that it's gone in the world. And when you read current events and you see things unfolding and you say to yourself, wow, that's really crazy. It's true. It is really crazy. But more importantly than looking at the current events and thinking about how crazy these current events are, etc., what really wouldn't make a real imprint on us is to think, as we say, Leiv Melachim B'Yad Hashem. The heart of kings is in God's hand. God moves the pawns, specifically when it comes to kings, when it comes to royalty. So you look at what's going on out there, and yes, it's scary and we don't know what's going to be, and the uncertainty in a general election and maybe Jeremy Corbyn even getting into office, that's all awful. That's the whole prospect is awful. And to think, by the way, that now in the next 2 months when we're already on our way out of the European Union, to now also have to be fighting a general election, it's just ridiculously crazy. So self-serving. It's terrible. People should, whatever. I hope that the British people punish him for being so self-serving, as they did punish Theresa May when she tried her luck, when she tried that general election. Because they also felt that was self-serving and people didn't like what she was saying. But don't fail to see God in the entire process. If the entire process of news and what happens in the world is all about what? This politician, that politician, and he said this and she said that, and then he tabled this motion and she said she didn't want it and more people went this way. Don't forget that there's a God and he runs the world and he runs these things also. And what he wants in the end of the day is going to happen, so that in the same way, Beshalach Parasha, it will be described by the outside media, by everybody. Look what Pharaoh did. But we look at it and we say, no, 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 no. God was involved in this entire story. The entire story happened because of God's involvement, and it was led by God. And this story, we don't know how it's going to unfold. It's really, really crazy, scary. However, what we do need to know and remember is God's involved in this story, and God's got a plan. And just let God work his plan, and let's not get too crazy about what is or what's not going on. That's the first thing to say about the politics.
In the next chapter, verse 5,
Yes.
it says that at that point, Pharaoh was told that the children of the people had gone out.
Yes. Now that doesn't mean that they've gone out. It means really that they've escaped. Because they said, what did they say?
They fled, actually.
Yeah, they said we're coming back in 3 days. That's what they've always been saying.
Right.
And now it's 3 days that passed and they're not coming back. And he got messengers back that said, hey, they're not anywhere near coming back. They've not even considered.
Yeah.
Do you know, like, as parents, where kids used to go out and you say be home at 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock, depending what age it is. And you call them at like 10:30 when they're supposed to be home at 11, and you're trying to get a feeling. Where are they up to? Is my kid? And you hear this loud music booming in the background. And where are you? Dad, I'm still in Birmingham. And you're like, well, if you're meant to be home at 11 o'clock and it's 10:30 and you're in Birmingham, you're not going to make that. You don't seem anywhere near on your way home. Yeah? And that's what they're seeing, that these 3 days have gone past. We're hoping that something's going to happen and nothing's happening. Right. So where is everybody? Yeah? Okay, now we move on to the next thing, which is also, again, Brexit. Tonight, I was preparing this, and then myself, I saw two very interesting things, and I figured they were very involved and they very connected to what we're speaking about. So the other thing I want to speak about as well. It says the following. So first thing was Rabbi Galinsky. Now we have the Egyptians run after the Jews. The Jews are now stuck. They have the Egyptians behind them. They have nowhere to run. They got the Sea of Reeds in front of them, and they are freaking out. And quite rightly so. It's not exactly an easy situation to be in. So they turn around to Moshe Rabbeinu and they start screaming to Moshe, Moshe, get us out of this trouble. Were there no burial grounds in Egypt? Well, you had to take us here. It says, Vayitzaku b'nei Yisrael el Hashem in verse 10, chapter 14, verse 10. Bnei Yisrael screamed out to God. So Rashi explains that Tofsu umnus avosam, they held on to what their grandparents used to do. Avram used to daven, Yitzchak daven, Yaakov daven, so they caught on to the same idea. They cordoned on to this idea, and they decided they were also going to daven. Chapter 14, verse 10. However, Nachmanides says, rather, that now there's a problem. There are people that are having a second thought about Moshe, about Moses as the leader. And they're thinking to themselves, Moshe, well, were there no graves in Egypt? What are you doing to us? And why did you do this? And why did you take us here? They're really starting to get very, very upset. They're starting to rethink everything. And maybe we need to change the whole situation. Maybe this is just wrong. That's what they're thinking. And they're saying to Moshe, maybe we should have gone back. Maybe we should turn around, etc., etc. And Rabbi Yerucham of Mir, the Mashgiach of Mir, writes an incredible thing. And I want to then come back to the politics of this also. But he says, many times, what the Yetzer Hara does is he doesn't really want to start off with you on new sins. Let's say you've never done something before, right? I don't know, you've never eaten treif before. He's not going to come to you and go, Ivor, you now want a cheeseburger. And you're like, no, I don't. I'm not gonna, that's not in the realm of possibilities at the moment. I'm not thinking about that. I'm not going to do that. Forget it. But, and I'm not going to choose you, Ivor, because I don't even want to go there. Let's talk about anybody. If you have a specific person, we'll call him Ruvain. Yeah? And Ruvain has sinned in the past with whatever it is. Okay? And then Ruvain has made up his mind, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to sin. So you know what the Yetzer Hara does? The way of the Yetzer is to try to get you to doubt your original resolution. Yeah? Because this is like a trodden path already. This is something we've done already.
Yeah.
And therefore, pardon?
He says you did it before, nothing happened, yeah.
Pardon?
There was no bolts of lightning or whatever. Yeah.
No, that's right.
It's not so terrible.
And you've made it, but I'm never going to do this again. Says, well, never is a very strong word, Probably you shouldn't do it very often, but never, I mean, come on. Who can say never and really mean never? Let's be honest about it. And as you said, was it really that bad? And it was really enjoyable, by the way, when you did it. And think about this and think about that. And the Yetzer Hara, the Yetzer Hara is very clever. Very, very clever. There's nobody and nothing as clever as the Yetzer Hara out there. He takes you and manipulates you and twists you into pretzel time and time again. And sometimes we say to ourselves, I shouldn't do that because I know this is just, and you do it anyway. Because he gets you the wrong way. Just does. And the Yetzer Hara, and he's got a certain thing that you've not managed in the past, he's going to attack you on that front because that's an Achilles heel. That's somewhere where you're weak. I'm going to come back to you. And he quotes a Chovos Halevavos, the Chovos Halevavos, which was I think an 8th century really scholar, then that was written by Rabbi Yehuda ibn Tibon Rabbi Nebachia ibn Pekudah, sorry. It was written in Arabic at the time. That was vernacular at the time. And then Rabbi Yehuda ibn Tibon in like the 10th or 11th century translated into Hebrew. But the Hebrew is also really, really difficult. It's very, very hard to manage. We do have it here somewhere. It's over there. Yeah, if you didn't want to read it. And he writes, one of the greatest tools of the Yetzer Hara is not so much trying to get you to do things that you've never done before, but rather rehashing and rethinking old stuff. Going over it again and again and again, and from all different angles. Maybe you should do this, maybe you should do that, and maybe you shouldn't be so closed-minded of this, whatever it is. So many different things. He says, but that's Atzas HaYetzer. That's the Yetzer Hara. And it was really interesting because you look it over and you look at what's going on, again, in the politics. And I'm not saying one way or another. I'm really so unsure about this entire system, and I think so many people have such strong opinions, but nobody has any opinions that are based on fact. I remember even originally when they were voting remain or leave, some people said, we'll leave, they'll come running after us for our business. They will. Others said, what do you mean? If we leave, we put ourselves in terrible danger. Who knows what's going to be? Who knows what's going to be with our economy? We need to stay. Where's the truth? Probably somewhere in between. Where in between? A little more in that direction, a little more in that direction. Who knows? And this morning and all throughout, the media's had such a brilliant time with this. This Brexit has been it's fueled them for how long?
2.5 years.
2.5 years. That's all they've talked about. Brexit. So much so that Jeremy Corbyn says, all the government has been doing in the last 2 years is talking about Brexit. Yeah, if you had been in government, you've been doing exactly the same thing. You know what you think? You would have ignored Brexit and gone on to see whether welfare works or it doesn't work? At this point, the greatest thing that is going on in this country and the greatest issue that this country is facing is Brexit and how it's going to work. It just is. That's what it is. So, a lot of people said, well, let's have another people's referendum. Let's look back at it again and let's see if this is really what we want to do. And other people are saying, no, we can't rehash the past. We voted on that already.
We don't really know any more than we did 2.5 years ago.
No. I mean, the truth is, at the moment, everything is up in the air.
Yeah.
Everything's up. The only thing we knew was we had one deal on the table that everybody seems to have thought was an awful deal and therefore was rejected by 230 different MPs, which is a huge amount of people to reject a deal. Okay, fine. We don't want this deal. What do we have instead? Who knows? Yeah? Norway plus, or people's vote, or new referendum, or no deal, or rescind Article 50. Yeah? Well, one of the things that you see over here, so in politics you might be able to do that. In politics you might be saying, okay, let's go back to the drawing board and say, look, the British people voted to leave. They wanted to leave. Maybe it wasn't such a good idea to leave. Maybe we thought we would get a better deal. We're not getting a better deal. So let's try and ask the people again if they believe we should leave or they believe we should remain. Maybe. Again, as I said, I don't know. I'm not, even politicians, they like to talk from a position of knowledge, when in reality, they don't know either. Nobody knows at the moment what's going on in this country. Nobody. It's a mess. It's an absolute mess. And Mitzvah Hashem will fix it. Hopefully. Right? But the thing is, in politics, you can start having that discussion. But when it comes to mitzvahs and averos, it's really important to know that certain things are not going to be rehashed. Certain things are not going to be rediscussed. It's not, let's go back and let's discuss this again and see, maybe we come to a different resolution. I've decided I'm not doing this aver anymore, or I'm doing this mitzvah. Let's rethink it one more time if this is the best plan of action. Yeah? Even in politics, a lot of people are saying this is a terrible thing to do. You've made a decision, stick with your decision. Don't start moving around. I remember I had a Rebbe in Mir Yeshiva who used to say to me, he says, you know what one of your biggest problems is? I don't know if I still have the same issue in the same way, but he said to me, you know what one of your biggest problems is? Indecisiveness. You decide to do this, and then 2 weeks later you decide to do something else, and you decide to do the third thing. He was talking specifically about learning. So you sit down and you say, have you ever had this? I don't know if you've ever had this. You sit down, Shmuel, you might have had this. You sit down, you pull out a Chumash, like, I'm going to learn Chumash. And you learn Chumash about 15 minutes, you go, you know what? I'm really in the mood for Gemara. You close it, you pull out Gemara. So you pull out Gemara, and 10 minutes later you go, really Medrash is what speaks to me. You pull out Medrash and you say, maybe I should be learning Mishnah. And you go around in circles, and the truth is you spend, in the hour that you were supposed to learn, you spend 25 minutes switching Svarim and thinking about what you should be learning, and the other 35 minutes you didn't learn straight either. Do you know why? Because you're constantly saying to yourself, halfway through the Chumash, and 2 psukim in, you're like, that's not really what I wanted to do. No, it's not really. Whatever, I'll do something else now. So nothing worked for you. Do you know why? Because the Yetzer Hara brought you into this matzav, into this situation of doubt and uncertainty, and then you kept on saying to yourself, maybe I should do this, maybe I should do that. And he said, you need to make a decision and stick with that decision. And even if sometimes it's not going to be the best thing, you say, well, I shouldn't have really chosen Chumash. You're right. But you pulled out the Chumash, you sat down the Chumash, so you do your hour on the Chumash. Pull it through. See it through to the end. Don't start turning around. Because when you turn around and choose different things, you just end up rehashing and rehashing and rehashing and never coming to anything real. Just end up with going back over the same conversations again and again and again. Somebody said to me that they have a committee in shul that arranges certain things. So they have a meeting, they make certain decisions, and there may be sometimes that people that text in afterwards says, I wasn't at the meeting, but I don't agree with what you're doing. And then they have to start all over again. They said that's not the way to do it. If there was, and we recently had this discussion, if there's a meeting and everybody sat together and we decided that we're going to be doing, I don't know, Malav Amalka, and we're going to be having this as the entertainment, then that's what we're going to be doing. Can't have somebody show up afterwards and throw a spat into the works and say, I'm not sure this is what you should be doing. Okay, let's start that. The whole 2 hours of discussion that we had last night all go out the window and let's start all over again. Nobody wants to do that. Unless if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But many times, it's just like somebody tables a motion and says, I don't think this is going to work. Okay, start all over again. Can't keep on starting all over again. And in your life, and specifically in your ruchnius, if you've made a decision, stick to that decision. Make sure you don't rehash it constantly, because if you do, you'll end up making many mistakes. Okay? That's the second thing. Right. Number 3. And this is, again, Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch says a beautiful idea, I think. And Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch is the ideas in Rav Hirsch are very interesting because it you have to understand it in the context of the time. Meaning, at the time of Rav Hirsch lived in the 1800s in Germany. And the predominant movement was the Reform and the Conservative movement. I think it was really the Reform movement. Conservative came later. Conservative, they saw Reform went too far and they said, no, we're conserving Judaism. And that's why they call themselves the Conservative movement. Even though conservative nowadays is very... They don't really conserve Judaism so much because they've gotten rid of lots. You go to America to conservative shuls, you'll find that lots of conservative shuls, they sit together, they don't keep Shabbos. A lot of the things that they do in Reform shuls, they do in conservative shuls as well. Not all of them. Some of them are a little bit more to the right and some a little bit more to the left. People have told me, actually, if our shul was in America, we'd be a conservative shul. Not so I won't be a conservative rabbi, but he said we'd be a conservative shul. It's just the quirk of Anglo Jewry that many people say I will affiliate Orthodox even though I myself am not religiously practicing. But I don't say I'm conservative or Reform. And even that's not necessarily true because that's also changing. Masorti, Reform, the other movements are starting to grow as well. The movement that's growing the most, obviously, is the Haredi movement. Or the Frum movement, really. Haredim at the quickest pace, but anybody. The religious movement in Judaism has always been the fastest growing and the biggest growing community. And, even though the Reform movement is getting more people in, but they don't have great track record over generations of keeping these people. Yeah? Neither do conservatives. In America, they did a study, and it's a crazy study. Yeah, I'm sure many of you have seen it. So, if not, Google, will your grandchildren be Jewish? And have a look. It shows you if you start with 100 people in one generation, in the conservative, I think you end up with 29, and by the Reform, you end up with 15, and with secular, you end up with only 9 Jews on average from every 100 Jews. And by the modern Orthodox, you'll end up with about 400 or 500, and by the Haredi Orthodox, we'll end up with about 2,000 or 3,000. Okay? So you see that. You see the shrinking of these communities. It's unbelievable what's going on. So, into this entire mess walks a rabbi by the name of Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch. And Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch says, what we need at the moment is what we'll call rationalist Judaism. It's very important that when people open up the Chumash, they will see rational thought behind everything. And for a long time, not that the thought was not rational, God forbid, everything that comes prior to Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch is also rational. But if you're talking to a 20th century mind, in those days it was a 19th century mind, yeah? And now it's a 21st century mind, but whatever. If you're talking to a 19th century mind that has become enlightened, and you start reading about certain things, and they go, oh, come on.
Because they thought they were modern, didn't they, as well?
They definitely were modern. For the day, they were very modern. They're modern, they were forward-thinking, they were clever people. Yeah. And they open up the Torah, and they go, this is, God forbid, I'm just saying it, but that's what they said, this is rubbish. Yeah. This is just ridiculous. Fairy tales, storybook. Got no value to modern man. What does Torah anyway give a modern person? What does it have to add to modern people? They have nothing to gain from this whole Torah business. Yeah? And Rav Hirsch said it's not true, obviously. And he set out, and this is what he did. He wrote his commentary specifically for the modern mind as a, inverted comma, rationalist commentary. That even the modern mind can read it and say, you know what? These are deep ideas expressed in a certain way that speak to the modern mind and are not in any way ridiculous, archaic, outdated, etc., etc. And so Rav Hirsch writes a beautiful thing here, which he writes in a few different places. We saw something, I think we mentioned this before. Did I mention Moshe Rabbeinu not being a great orator? I think we spoke about that. Moshe Rabbeinu was not this great orator, so nobody should say he was this great diplomat. He had these great skills. He was able to bamboozle everybody. He was able to walk into parliament and give a speech, and everybody would get up and give him a standing ovation. He wasn't that. Okay? So Rav Hirsch says another thing. He says, look what happens over here. There's trouble, and the Jewish people look at Moshe Rabbeinu and they say, Hami b'li'en kvarim mitzrayim l'kachtonu lamos b'midbar? You crazy? There's no graves in Egypt? We're going to go into a desert? We're going to die in this desert? What's your problem? What is wrong with you? Yeah? He says, you know what that shows us? It shows us an amazing thing. He shows us the Jews were a rational thinking people. Some people say, the Jews, they'd been a slave nation. They were crazy. They were just happy to go out with anybody. Anybody that would have taken them out. They were on some kind of trip on mushrooms. Who knows what? Yeah? Just Meshuggah people. Says Rav Hirsch, no. We're not dealing with Meshuggah people. Read it. When there's issues, they stood up to Moshe Rabbeinu and say, hey, you'll look later on, there's no water. There's nothing to drink. Nobody said, Moses is the prophet. We'll all go and die from thirst. That's okay. We love you, Moses. No. Moshe Rabbeinu says sometimes, Od me'adus kaluni. I got to wait a little bit longer. They're going to kill me, these people. Yeah. The people were tough. The people thought about what they were doing. The people were very much in charge of their own emotions, of their own intellect. And if Moshe Rabbeinu gave them something that they didn't like, they let Moshe Rabbeinu know about it. They didn't sit down and go, yes, master. Of course, master. That's not. That's never been the Jewish people. Have you ever seen the Jewish people as a meek kind of people that just turn over and let others tell them what to do? Is that the kind of Jews that you know? That's not,
You see it over and over. They're always grumbling about something, aren't they?
Correct. But the point with the grumbling is, and that's what Rav Hirsch is saying, the grumbling shows you that we're dealing with a rational people that's going through rational issues and rational discussions and looking at the entire thing and saying to themselves, wait a minute, let's understand what's going on over here. Not an irrational people that was just happy to run away with anybody and to go into a desert, into this dangerous place with no water. If you think about it. Let's all go out to the desert with no drink, no food, and just cattle. And lots of gold. This is where we're going. We're going to the desert. Why? Moses said so. It's bonkers. It's crazy. It is. And you look at it and you say, well, the Jewish people are willing to do that, so it must be crazy. They must be bonkers. They must be not normal. Otherwise, why would they do such a thing? Says Rav Hirsch, okay. If they're so crazy, if they're so obedient, if they're so brainless and so mesmerized or hypnotized or brainwashed or whatever you want to call them, they would never ever show any disrespect, or never ever would they show any disobedience to Moshe Rabbeinu. They would never say, Moshe, how could this be? What are you doing to us? Never would they say such a thing. Because they're too meek, too timid, too bamboozled by Moshe Rabbeinu. So Rav Hirsch says, no, that's not exactly what happened. Look at what happened. Whenever there was trouble, they said to Moshe, Moshe, there's trouble. This doesn't make sense. What are you doing to us? We're not going into the desert like that. We're not willing to sit by and watch you do this to us. We're not. Do you know what that shows? That shows mind, intellect, and choice. You see, the Jewish people are telling Moshe Rabbeinu, we're not just going to do what you say. If it makes sense, we will do it. If it doesn't make sense, we won't do it. And that's the people that followed Moshe Rabbeinu into the desert. And when you understand that that's the people that follow Moshe Rabbeinu into the desert, that gives you an understanding that Moshe Rabbeinu truly led them in a way where they felt comfortable that he was actually leading them somewhere. They felt comfortable enough that he was going to give them to drink and he was going to give them to eat and they were going to be protected and that they had nothing to worry about. Not that this is some kind of crazy story. Some crazy, deranged people that all followed a deranged leader into a wilderness without any plans? That sounds normal? That's the kind of people that you look up to? So the verse says you have to realize we're dealing with intellectual, normal, levied people. Yeah, the Nasa and Ishma comes later. Rav Isaacson says they said Nasa and Ishma, which is true, but that's much later. And even then they went against the Nasa and Ishma. But it's important to realize that all the way through the entire process, even later on when they say Nasa and Ishma, we see that they're willing to serve the golden calf. So there's a very interesting up and down going on over here. But what's important to realize is throughout all the ups and downs, the Jewish people remain a level-headed, and a free-willed people all the way through. Never did God take away their will. Never were they forced to do anything. And never at any point in time when they were uncomfortable with something did they just let the issue go. They didn't. You read about it again and again in the Torah. They stood up to Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe Rabbeinu at times held up his hands and says, I can't do this anymore. These people are too tough. They're too difficult. God, get me out of here. I can't handle it. We'll see it. And when we get to Bamidbar, he just says, God, what are you doing? Why'd you make me in charge of these people? Moshe Rabbeinu gives a whole thing. Did I give birth to them? Was I pregnant with them? I should carry them in my hands. I'm going to get all this meat from. They want meat. How am I going to come up with meat from? What do you want from me, God? How am I supposed to do this? You see, we're dealing with. You get I think, and that's what I'm saying. It works with the understanding of a rationalist Judaism. Understanding and telling the people, and that's what's so important. Understanding and telling people in those days and nowadays as well, that the people in the time of the desert were not some crazy, archaic, ridiculous, brainwashed set of people. They were rational as we are. And we can see the rationality in the Torah. And we can see the rationality as it comes out in the conversations with Moshe Rabbeinu and the arguments with Moshe Rabbeinu. And then when you see that, to still realize and to recognize that the Jewish people were still willing to follow Moshe Rabbeinu, that's the greatness of Moshe. That's what makes Moshe Rabbeinu the leader. And that's what makes us God's people. Okay? Thank you very much. Again, as I said, anybody who's watched it, if you did enjoy this, please share this with your people so that more people can watch it. And thank you very much for joining us.